All right, guys, welcome back to the Sex and Bacon podcast. On today's episode, I have a guest with me. I have Danielle Savory with me, and we are going to talk all things sex, but from a different perspective with the brain and some science background. So I'm really excited to have you here. Thank you for being here.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, can you give everybody just a little bit about like your background so they kind of have an understanding, I guess, of like where the conversation is going to go today and what we're going to talk about?
Yeah, for sure. So I am a sex coach, and a lot of people are like, what does that even mean?
Mhm,
It's not blowing a whistle in a bedroom with anybody. Really, what I do is I focus on our like sexual psychology and the way that we think about sex and the way that we approach sex, because so much of what's going on in our brain, and really thinking about the brain as the biggest sex organ, is the gatekeeper to us feeling comfortable, to feeling
mhm,
safe, to being able to open up to our pleasure, to be able to actually experiencing more orgasms. And so I'm really coaching women, number one, on that mindset piece, depending on their past experiences or how they've, grown up, but then also just on their current relationship with their body and how they can land in their body in a pleasurable way. And sometimes it's regulating the nervous system, sometimes it's being able to understand you've had a stressful day and meeting yourself. So it's really about the mind body connection as well as what's going on in the mind. And so that is what I do. And my background's in neuroscience. I'm a brain nerd at heart. And then I love sex. So just put the two and two together, and that's where it comes in.
I love that because I feel like a lot of the times that I have these conversations or we're talking about sex and stuff with a lot of guests that I have on, it's more from a spiritual aspect, which
Mhm.
I love for myself as well, and I do believe in that. So it kind of does go in hand. But I mean, there really is obviously another component to sex, and like you said,
Yeah.
from an like a neuroscience background, this is a totally different perspective and a different way to kind of look at it. So I find like it kind of has like another layer to understanding ourselves and sex and maybe different and better ways to kind of achieve the pleasure and the orgasms that we're all looking for and that we all want to have.
Yeah, because it really gets into the psychology of who we are, whether it's, like
Hmm.
I said, past experiences, past beliefs, how we are socialized as women, like all these like kind of unconscious thoughts that we've been carrying around with us that we don't understand how they impact the way that we're able to experience pleasure. And when we start unpacking that, we're like, oh, holy shit, like there's so much here. And we really have
Yeah.
to pause and start with the brain on that.
Okay, so one thing I want to ask right off the bat, and
Mhm.
I am speaking from a single woman's perspective on these things, and I think that their relationships aren't necessarily what they used to be. And obviously, that whole foundation of people staying in marriages and relationships long term, kind of no matter what situation, isn't the norm. There is way more
Mhm.
single women out there now. The way I grew up with a thought and belief around, sex was that it was shameful. We don't talk about it. You're not allowed to
Mhm.
enjoy it with multiple people. Casual
Mhm.
sex is bad. Casual sex is shameful. It's judged, and it's the all the terminology that comes with it. You're the slut shaming. You're a whore. You're this. You're that.
Yep.
And I do think that that really does affect girls in a very heavy way. However, I do believe like single men and women are 100% still deserving of pleasure, of orgasm, of enjoying sexual encounters without that shame and that guilt and that judgment. So I know there's married women that obviously listen to this, but like coming from a single girl's standpoint, the psychology behind the shame and the judgment and the guilt that we feel for wanting to have sex with men in casual
Mhm.
relationships. Can we just kind of talk about that for a few minutes? Because I feel like even as a 42-year-old woman who
Yeah.
I don't live in shame and I don't, buy into that. I still sometimes feel that or have those conversations where people are like,
Yeah.
well, why would a guy want to be with somebody who's had multiple partners or is out there sleeping with multiple partners? And I do believe sex is an experience and we're all deserving of it. So, can we talk about the psychology behind some of those things that we carry heavy as a woman?
Yeah, well, I do think that I love that you brought all of this up. And I think that there is so much shame, even some women that are carrying this that are in committed relationships, it's
Mhm.
still the slut shaming has such an impact on our overall psychology and our relationship with our bodies and our sexuality. And when you think about when we got a lot of these messages, it was in very formidable ages, you know, when our brain was still developing, when we were still
Mhm.
young, when we didn't really know all these things. And that will create these long term memories. And that really does have an impact on our body. And so, one of the first things that I would say is understanding that a lot of these shameful thoughts are coming from that younger version of you. And so I think it's so interesting when I'm coaching women, like they're like, why do I still think this? Because I don't still think this. Like you said, you're like, I feel fine, but then they also come
Mhm.
up. And it can be this confusing moment where it's called cognitive dissonance, where it's like your brain is believing two things at the same time. Like, this is okay. And also, is this okay? And so we're
Mhm.
balancing these two beliefs. But when we understand that one of the reasons this is such a potent belief that we carry with us and we feel is at the time when we were taught that this was shameful and to not talk about it, and definitely don't be known as a slut because then you're just going to have the red letter A for the rest of your life, that was literally triggering like a fear response in our body. It was making us feel unsafe. Like, I can't do this because it's not safe. I'm going to get kicked out of my community. Like, that's a survival technique. And so the brain understands, like, hey, if you get labeled as this, if you are this kind of woman, then you're might be alone. You might be alienated. And that's like a very primal fear. And so understanding and having so much compassion for herself, like, of course, women, like, of course you felt that way. Like, look at what society told you. You were going to be,
Mhm.
disconnected from society. You're going to be ridiculed. You're going to be publicly humiliated. That's really scary. And so when it's triggering that part of that fear response in our nervous system, like, that belief is going to carry with you a really long time. And we do have to do some healing around it. And like, oh, baby girl, like, that's that part of you that was so afraid of
Mhm.
like being judged. And I see you and I love you. And remember, we believe differently now as a grown ass woman. Like, somebody else
Right.
put that on you. And like, we believe differently. And so, one of the things I love to remember is like these thoughts, these doubts, these fears, they're still going to come up, especially because it was planted at such, like I said, like such an impressionable age. And we just strategize for when they do. It's like, oh, yeah, I know that. I'm going to fear this when I start dating again, or if I get asked the question, how many people I've been with, or whatever it may be. And to have like a strategy to have your own back in those moments so that you can just recognize, like, hey, my brain is just doing what it's supposed to do. It's delivering these old thoughts. That's all they are. And like, I love you and I understand why those are coming up. And that's not what we believe anymore. And so it's really just this moment of allowing yourself to like have so much love and compassion, have so much like being
Mhm.
on your own side for the fact that these are still coming up, but recognizing that where you're going, you don't have to. Like, I get to choose what I believe now. And what I like to think about is like, if we're going to give airtime to the doubts or the insecurities or the shame, you have to give equal airtime to all the other possibilities that help you feel alive. So it's like, if you're giving airtime to like, oh, the doubts and like, I'm afraid they're going to think this. What about also giving airtime to they're not going to think this, and why this makes
Right.
me such like a beautiful woman, and why I'm so proud of like myself and who I am right now. So even if you can't let go of all of them, give yourself permission to give equal airtime to both.
Okay, absolutely. Do you think then too, I mean, like aside from the stuff that like we feel that I think other women kind of put on other women, it's still that programming that I think men seem to carry as well as, if she does this, then she wouldn't be a good housewife, or if a girl is into these
Mhm.
things sexually, then she couldn't be a good partner. Um and like there's that imbalance of somebody who's sexually open or has kinks or fetishes, those things now no longer make you a quality partner as far as somebody who could cook, who could provide, who could raise children. Like the
Yeah.
psychological imbalance in those two things. Literally, I was told that as a kid is, the guys marry the housewife and fuck the whore. But it's like the girl
Totally. Yeah.
couldn't be the dirty girl all in one. You couldn't have this
Yeah.
woman that was your housewife, your partner, as well as somebody who sexually pleased you in many ways.
Right, right. Well, I think it's like one of the most interesting things I think of is the way that women and as women, we have been taught not only to be, objects of pleasure, we'll put that on the back
Hmm.
burner for now, but how to be desirable. Right? Where men have been taught how to desire. They have been taught that it's okay to want. It's okay to
Hmm.
like feel that and have desire. Women have been taught how to be desirable, how to be likable, how to be nice, how to like take care of all of the things. And so, especially when it comes to like a lifetime partner. And so, when you can see these, men, they've gotten the same socialization that we have, right? And so they're still saying, like, yeah, but you're supposed to be desirable. And those traits aren't
Hmm.
desirable because a woman that actually is in touch with her desire is so like counter intuitive or just counterculture really to the way that we've been socialized. And there is a big shift happening right now. There is, I mean, just in the evidence of this podcast existing and the evidence of these
Hmm.
conversations happening. So there is definitely a shift, but there is still this residue of all of that. And I think that's going to happen for a while. And so many of the women are doing the work to be more open and change their mindset. Like, no, you know what? My desire actually matters here. Like, I'm not just here to like please you and cater to you and people please. Like,
Right.
I am able and worthy of feeling pleasure and desire, like you said at the beginning of this interview, right? And the men, even though they're going to learn, and I'm being very,
Hmm.
generalized here, but like they will learn this eventually and kind of catch on. The women, we have to do healing around it because it allows us to connect with our body. We've been in this state of like nervous system dysregulation because of these kind of messages for generations. And so like unpacking that and healing for that, we can see how that would directly benefit us, right? And I think that
Right.
it makes sense why we're doing this work. And I believe there's so many men out there that are also doing the work to rewire their own thinking around it, but it's not as obvious what the benefit to them is right now. We can see, well, it's amazing relationship. You're going to have a way better relationship when you're in that, but it's
Right.
not as obvious to them right now. Where for us women, it's really obvious why we would want to change our mind and heal around this so that we can show up fully expressed.
Right. So, yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. Do you think there's an intimidation factor as well for men, that a woman who is in her sexual power, who is, a sexual creature and a sexual being, who owns that, do you think that they feel the intimidation around that, so in turn they judge that a little bit more, they don't know what to do with it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is the whole reason that whole messaging came around to
Yeah.
begin with. Like when you look at the onset of like puritanical culture and the patriarchy, it was because like, wait a minute, these women are too powerful because they're fully
Hmm.
expressed and feeling this. We have to make this wrong. We have to make this a sin. We need to alienate those women. We need to put them somewhere else because we can't handle the heat.
Right. Yeah. It's just so unfortunate
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
think it's confusing for a woman who does the work. We do the healing. We step
Yeah.
into our feminine desires, our sexual energy. We own it. And then when you go out there and you're trying to date and you come across as this person, it's like right away, it's like guys then just assume and think that a woman who can talk about sex openly, a woman who maybe, works in an entertainment
Yeah.
industry or say a taboo industry, it's like that shame of, okay, well, I don't know what to do with this, and that means that you are this person and like we can't go past this, when it's like we're waiting for the men to catch up
Yeah.
to doing the healing, to doing the work, and to recognizing,
Yeah.
a woman who has done it all and can fully embody and encompass everything that she is meant to be, in order to help them heal and in order to help them step into like a comfortable role in their sexuality.
Yeah,
But yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
they're not there
it
yet.
is unfortunate. And, and well, one of the things I think that is like helpful because we really want connection, right? Like that's at the
Mhm.
end of the day, we all want connection. That's why we're out there. And so, one of the ways that's helped me really think differently about this is because at first, when I first started doing a lot of this healing and a lot of this work on myself, I was just pissed. Like it was, I'm just angry. Like, like all the ways that I was socialized and the messages from it. And I'm just like, "Wah," right? Like, there's a lot of
Mhm.
anger. And I needed to go through that era. And then I came to this place of like, but at the end of the day, I still really want connection. And when we realize that even though they might not see this or be there or all of that, like we all got the same socialization. And when I think about that and think about what it would have been like being a man, also marinating in this culture, also getting and absorbing all of these messages about what a woman should or shouldn't be like, then it makes sense why. And that, not that to say that that's okay, but it makes sense why they believe that way and why they're
Mhm.
approaching women this way. And that softens it a little bit for me. Like, it allows me to have a
Okay.
little bit more compassion, like, "Oh, like, you haven't l you ha you haven't seen it in a different way, that makes sense." Like, I also didn't see it for a different way for a really long time, that's why I've been carrying around so much shame. That makes
Right.
sense, but that softening has allowed some really beautiful conversations to come out of it, where it's less blamey and more
Mhm.
understanding, because when we go into this place of like, this is you, why are you thinking this way about women, like of course the defenses are going to come up, zero connection happens, no conversation. But when it's like, oh, I see you, like that makes sense, like, and I don't see it that way at all, like in a really just light, like that's not how I feel at all. Like, would you like to
Okay.
hear how I think about it? It completely
Yeah.
changes the texture of the interaction.
Yeah, okay, I could see that, right? It is like just that inner conversation with yourself of understanding from somebody's perspective who just maybe isn't quite there yet.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're not
Okay.
condoning like shitty behavior, by the way.
Mhm.
That's not what this is about. We're not
Yeah.
condoning, but that understanding alone can really soften it, so that if there is somebody that you meet that you really click and they're still holding on to a lot of these belief systems that they, were socialized in, it can at least soften
Right.
it. So maybe there's curiosity, maybe there can be an open dialogue between you two about it, where it's like, "Oh, wow." Like, when we don't make them wrong and we're just like, "Wow, I don't think that way at all." Like, the
Mhm.
way I see it, that's totally different than like, "Well, this is me and you better get on board or get out of sight." Like it's a different
Yeah.
conversation.
Okay. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. Okay, so getting into the brain aspect here, and if we're talking sex and the nervous system, or the psychology end of it, let's have a
Yeah.
conversation about that, about what maybe people don't realize or aren't thinking about when it comes to the brain and sex.
Yeah, I mean that we don't really think about the brain and sex at all, right? Like that's what I think is
No.
so funny about it all, but it really is a brain thing. Like if you're like, let's say you're getting it on with somebody and you don't feel like your arousal is happening as quickly as you want. And so maybe all of a sudden you're like, oh, like, am I going to come? Am I not? Am I getting more aroused? What are they going to think? Like,
Mhm.
are they getting bored? Are they getting frustrated? Like, they've been down there for a while, whatever it might be. Like, what happens to your body when you think that? It's like you immediately tense up. You disconnect from the pleasure. You disconnect from the possibility of even becoming aroused, because now you're in your head instead of your body, and you're in a state of worry. You're in a state of anxiety, which is literally will shut you down, because now you're in a totally different part of your nervous system that's not conducive to pleasure at all. Like the blood flow has literally been sucked away from your vagina. So it's like just understanding that there's so many ways that our brain is directly impacting our physiology. And that's just an example of like what happens like immediately coming into
Mhm.
it, but there's so many other thoughts or things that could happen that are not even related to sex, like if you're stressed about your job or finances or whatever it might be, and then your partner comes and grabs your ass and you're like, "Ah, like get away from me." But it's
Yeah.
because you're already in a freaked out state in your nervous system, and then you might start believing, "You know what happened to my libido? I don't want it anymore. There's something wrong with me." When it's like, "No, your ass was literally just grabbed when you're in an activated state of your nervous system. You're not supposed to soften to that or like that right then. That's okay." And when you understand that about yourself, you can start doing techniques to help yourself and also help your sex life.
Okay, so going to like the first part of that of what you said, because I feel like that is one of the
Mhm.
most common things that happens to women. And funny enough, like I think that happened to me probably a couple weeks ago. And the difference was literally of having the person that, I was having a sexual relationship over at my house where I feel very
Mhm.
secure and my things are here and the right lighting or toys and
Mhm.
in a space where I'm super comfortable, and
Yeah.
I was at his place and the bright like bedroom light was on, and right away I got in my mind of like, this is a bright
Yes.
light, and what is my body's going to look different in this light compared to what it looks like in the light of my house. And I feel like sometimes when you don't have that love relationship yet and it's something new,
Yep.
those are things we think about more starting out with somebody.
Yes.
And it was
Yes.
almost like that thought of the light prevented me from being turned on in the way that I always have been prior, and I couldn't
Yes.
get wet. And then right away, I'm like, wonder if he notices that I'm not as wet as I normally am. So now does he think I'm not turned on? Fuck, how do I get turned on
Yes,
again? This
totally.
light is still bright and it's still fucking annoying me, and I still don't feel sexy with this bright light in my eyes. And now all I can focus on is
Yes.
the light, and my body wasn't responding in any way, shape, or form. And it's like you're trying to, but it's like we have this
Mhm.
thought like, well, if you touch me in the right spot or in the right way, it will just activate, because it seems like for men that is so much easier for them. But I
Yep.
just couldn't shift out of that, and it kind of
Yeah.
ruined the whole evening. And then I was like, okay, so is this just one of those things where I can't have sex with him at his place because like all these other external factors played such a huge role in my ability to let go? Or how do I pull myself out of that to be able
Yeah.
to relax back into a state of like enjoying the pleasure? Like, it happens to all of us,
Yes.
but like I'm sure we're all wondering, how do we get back to it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think what I love that you brought up this example because it's so big. One of the things that I like to think about getting into any sexual interaction is how could I create the most erotic vessel? And what I mean by that is like an environment that like pleasure and desire are just going to flourish. And sometimes that's in your physical environment, but mostly it's like how I'm feeling in here, like what's going on in my brain and
Mhm.
what's going on in my body. I personally am a neurodivergent person, so my ADHD, especially with something like bright lights, would be really hard to just pull it back in. So I think it's also understanding like our little, idiosyncrasies, or if we veer at all from the neurotypical spectrum, giving ourselves permission to understand that like something like a bright light or a cold room or
Mhm.
some dripping that's happening in the bathroom next door that just sounds so loud when you're trying to get it on can really be distracting. And the more that we can turn those kind of things down, the more helpful. So when we really become advocates for like our own pleasure, it's like we need to turn the light off, right? Like really just understand we can come back to our body, but also understanding that our pleasure is important. Like it's your pleasure too. And when we get into this place where we start asking for what we need to help us be back in our body, to help us have more of that
Right.
experience. So sometimes it might be a light. I live in Portland, Oregon. It gets pretty cold here. And my husband thinks that my wool socks are quite ugly. I don't really give a fuck. Like they help me not be cold and enjoy sex more. Are they sexy? No, But I
Mhm.
feel sexier because I am taken care of. I am
Right.
comfortable. My brain isn't like going off on some tangent about how my toes are cold. So I'm going to wear the wool socks and we're going to have amazing sex because of the wool socks. And so there's certain things where
Yeah.
it's like when we just understand, what some of these are, they can be as easy as just asking or changing. But other things, like when you're getting into your head, I like to think of it as like a reset. It's just noticing that you veered off, like noticing
Mhm.
that you wandered, And so it's like a typical mindfulness type technique. You're like, oh, there's my brain worrying again. Okay, back to my body. And I like to take a nice, like deep inhale. I might even have, my partner or something like slow down or stop so I can be like, just a minute, I need to get back in here. A deep inhale, really following that breath, and then going back to sensation. Always trusting that you can build yourself back up and like just getting lost back in the sensation, back in the breath. Your mind will wander again, and then bringing it back. And so that is really a skill that we can develop over time, and it becomes so much easier and it takes less time to get back.
Okay, cuz yeah, I feel like in like what you said, like I like our pleasure is still just as important, and acknowledging the things that we need in order for us to
Yeah.
set into it. But I think there's so much fear around asking for what you want, because then the
Yes.
insecurity of, like, for me to like, then it was like, if I ask him to shut off the light, is he going to think that I'm self-conscious about my body, and then will that turn him off? And then it's all of those things that you start to wonder, like, so
Yes.
now I'm no longer thinking about my pleasure and what I need, I'm worried about
Yes.
his. And I'm worried that if I
Yes.
change something else that accommodates my pleasure, it will ruin his pleasure. But do
Yes.
you guys really think about it in the same way, or are we just overthinking this and creating these scenarios on our own?
Yes, and compassionately we are, because we have been told to be objects of pleasure. We have been
Right.
told that sex is so that we can, please, if in heterosexual relationships, please the man and look appealing to them and make the right
Mhm.
moans and do the right things and do the right position. So, like, of course we're in our fucking heads. Like, of course we're
Mhm.
worried. It makes all the sense in the world. And that's where the practice comes in, right? Like,
Okay.
to see this jumble of this socialization of like, oh, a woman, of course, I was worried about
Yeah.
what he's thinking. And I'm learning to be my own pleasure advocate here. And I'm learning to step into this version of me where it's like, it's not that you don't care about the other person, but you care fiercely about you. And
Right.
how am I going to be on my own side? And also not making a big deal about it, right? I think that's the other thing. If we feel really awkward, if we're worried about what they're going to think turning the light off, that's going to come through. But if we're
Mhm.
like, of course, I'm going to ask to turn the light off because it's really distracting to me and there's nothing wrong with that, we set the tone that
Okay.
there's nothing wrong, right? So it's just like, hey, like that light is really bright right now. And I just noticed how distracted I am by it. Do you have something softer? Do you have
Mhm.
some candles that we can light instead, right? So it's like really just making it a non-issue because you don't believe that you advocating for your pleasure is a non-issue.
Right. I like how you brought up the candles thing, because I am a very situational person. I get
Mhm.
more into things that are sensual, sexual situations, but I find I come across a lot of guys who, when you try to express a need for sensuality, for
Mhm.
them, there's a confusion of, she must be in love with me, or that feels like something you do when you love somebody. I don't want to give the
Mm.
message that I love you by being sensual, by being
Yeah.
sexual. And if we light a candle, that feels romantic. And now we're no longer fucking, we're doing
Yeah.
something, the whole making love type of thing. And I find guys shut down, and they've said, we've had that conversation, even guy friends. And I'm like, there's so many different layers to sex and what works for a woman and
Yeah.
what works for a guy. And why can't you have sensuality in a casual sexual relationship with somebody without there having to be this weird, well, it feels like love and I don't want to do
Yeah.
that. because we're uncomfortable with it from a guy's perspective. Whereas for a girl, we're like, no, man, the
Right.
candles, the whatever, it adds to the foreplay of like the build of this orgasm.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I
But,
mean, I think it's true. A lot of guys are just afraid of intimacy, and when we slow down, we're face to face with, like, more vulnerabilities and
mhm,
more intimacy. Love doesn't have to be a part of it. It's just intimacy with another human being. And so many men, I mean, think about like with women, like we're intimate with each other all the time. We're sharing our emotions, we're looking at each other in the eyes, we're having this conversation. Like that is something that we are actually quite comfortable with. And so
mhm,
it makes sense that they're not. And I love that you've had conversations with men, and I think it's just important. It's like opening up these communications, like, hey, I noticed when I recommended candles that you kind of seemed uncomfortable or shut down. Like, what's that about? And just ask,
mhm,
because we can assume that it's because they don't want the romance or the love or they're afraid of it, right? But when we just ask, like, what's that about? Like, I just noticed a total change in your demeanor. And then you give them the opportunity to answer and to
right,
be curious, right? And give us like the opportunity for us to have some curiosity and have a conversation, because casual or a partnership you're trying to get into, you want to be able to talk about stuff with this person. And
right,
if they're not somebody that you can even talk to about why they're uncomfortable with candles, then it's probably not even somebody that you want to be in a casual sexual relationship with, because there isn't that equality of concern about my pleasure and your pleasure are on the same playing field, and this is something that you want.
right. Yeah, that's fair. I like that. And I do think it actually kind of, I know communication is a struggle for everybody, single women,
Yes.
relationships and stuff. So, having those conversations, I think it's like the more you can step out of your comfort zone to ask those things, to say it, it gets
Yeah.
easier, and we build that muscle to be able to speak up about what it is that we need in order for us to
Yeah.
experience pleasure to the biggest degree. And maybe when a guy sees that you can be vulnerable and you can communicate those things, that it actually, like you said, it opens up a way for them to maybe be able to step up and say, well, hey, you know what, I kind of like this as well. Like
Yeah.
you were saying this is something you need, but this is something that, like, could we try? I've noticed I enjoy it. And it had those open lines of communication, which seem to be a huge struggle of people asking for what they want.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why it's like the basis of so much of the work I do is really giving women permission to love themselves fiercely. And I know it's like the
Hmm.
self love gets thrown around all the time. It's so cheesy, it's so overused, but it's absolutely true, because when you have your own back, then you're more willing to have conversations that take courage, because it's like, no matter what, like, I feel proud of myself for
Hmm.
asking this question, or I feel really proud of myself for speaking up and asking to turn the lights on. I feel really good, like, even if their reaction is awful, even if they storm
Right.
out, even if they shut down, being like, oh, I am so proud because I stayed calm, I was curious. I just asked a question. I opened up conversation. Like, whatever's going on over there, that's their business. That literally has nothing to do with me. That's them. And I got me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. And I mean, I guess in that respect, if a guy reacts to that degree, then is that really somebody that you want to be sharing an intimate sexual experience
Exactly.
with, anyways? Right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Better to figure that out the first
100%.
time. Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
exactly. See you later. Bye. Yeah.
Right? I mean, like, I guess the
No,
song
thank
goes
you.
next, but it's like, bringing
Yep.
in people who, I guess, meet where you're at with your sexuality and the experiences that you want to have.
Exactly, and the kind of connection that you wanna have,
Mhm.
and the willingness to say the thing as an advocate for yourself. Again, not I think sometimes when we hear "advocate for myself," it automatically means against the other person,
Mhm.
and I think that's such a clear distinction, that me speaking up for me doesn't mean I'm anti you. It actually means that I'm pro me, and when I'm pro me, both of us benefit here. Both of us can have a better experience and juicier connection, and understanding that we actually can't control how they're thinking or feeling, just like they can't control how we're thinking or feeling. Like that emotional responsibility is something else women have really been burdened with all of the socialization around our sexual relationships, is that we are responsible for keeping the man happy. We are responsible if their ego is bruised. We're responsible for
Right.
making sure they're turned on. And so like uncoupling and untangling this like really deep socialization, like actually no, like I'm responsible for my orgasm, you're responsible for your orgasm, and
Yeah.
separating that I'm not responsible for that. And
Right.
that's so liberating.
Oh, absolutely, right. And I think that obviously the more conversations people have about it, it kind of help you get there. But it is a struggle. It's a
Yeah,
mental struggle.
for
So being
sure.
in the moment, if let's just say those distractions are happening and you're
Mhm.
getting out of your body and you're getting out of the place where you're starting to feel, pleasure and the intimacy and stuff, like what are say your very let's say your top three tips or tricks for like literally in that moment that you can try to center yourself back into your body, something that's easy, tangible for people to kind of go to. Let's just say for people who maybe aren't doing like the work, but they're still
Yeah.
looking for like a tool to, redirect.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would ask, is it something that I can immediately fix? Like, is this something mentally going on, or is it something I can just ask for and have it
Mhm.
fixed? Like, if you're cold, if there's a smell that's really gross, if there's, the light, whatever it is this something I can quickly fix by asking or going and handling it? So,
Okay.
if that is, do that. If not, then it is really just noticing, oh, I'm in my head, not with like, you're in your head again. What's the matter with you? But just like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, there I went. I wandered. And then I like to take that reset breath. So that really breathing in. And because my brain gets highly distractible, and I think a lot of people have struggled with mindfulness and meditation, get curious. Be like, what feels good in my body right now? Or what area do I want to pay attention to right now? So when you give your brain a question like that, it prompts it because your brain really wants to like be a good problem solver. So it's like going to go on a mission like, ooh, where does it feel good? Oh, well, I'm not really liking that, but that feels really good.
Mhm.
Or I could just, if I want to pay attention to like, let's say my vulva, I can be like, what's going on in my vulva right now? Like, ooh, that feels really, like whatever it is, like you can go to a particular body part. So just getting really curious. And it might not sound like a tangible thing, but it is. It's
Right.
like you
Okay.
being able to redirect your mind is an action you're taking, and directing it to curiosity is going to bring your brain's attention immediately back into your body. You can also do like any senses, like what am I seeing that I like? What am I tasting that I like? What am I hearing that I like?
Ah,
What am I smelling that I really like? So any of the five senses, you don't have to just use like the felt sense and the feeling of
okay.
touch. You can also use something else of your five senses, and any of those are going to take you away from your thinking part of your brain and into your body.
I like that. That does feel very tangible in the sense of, I guess, like thinking of myself in that situation where everything was going on and then I couldn't spin out of it. It was like, instantly I think it's like we expect that our vaginas are supposed to be reacting. And the minute they stop
Yeah.
reacting, you forget about the other parts of your body that you could maybe
Hmm.
use to try to like get back into it. So I guess for me, like
Yeah.
really stopping that and being like, hey, you know what? Like go back to like say like a back massage or like some
Yep.
softer gentle feels, touch some other parts of my
Hmm.
body, give that spot
Exactly.
a break in the sense of feeling guilty that she's not reacting and she's not
Yeah.
responding, and then like asking for like the verbal, like talk dirty to me or say some things and these things, and try to
Yes.
kind of like pull yourself back into like okay, and then redirecting back into your the actual oral pleasure or whatever part that they were doing, I guess. But yeah, I think it's like you
Yeah.
forget about it and it's so responsive of like she's not working, nothing else is going to
Yeah.
work, and yet we have all these
Yeah.
other nerves and parts of our body that we can use that I think we just in that moment you kind of forget about.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I would suggest too is like when you're noticing that, to actually have like compassion for, our vaginas, and being like, "Oh, you're working exactly how you're supposed to.
Okay.
You're working for what's happening in your brain." Right? If you're worried and anxious, it's supposed to dry up and take out. It's like we're under threat. We
Mhm.
have other stuff to worry about. And so when we have that compassion, like, oh, that makes sense. Like, oh, of course. Like, what if you have a little name or something like that? Like that also is going to help your body work together with you and get you more back on board. Cause it's like, think about telling like a little kid, you're not doing what I asked you to do. You're not paying
Right.
attention. You're not getting into it. That kid's going to shut down. But if you're like, oh, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing if that's what we were going to do, but we're actually
Mhm.
not, riding a bike right now. We're trying to focus on, I don't know, like putting our shoes on, right? So it's like
Right. Yeah.
when we just like understand, like, of course, you are doing the right thing for what you think you're supposed to be doing, but we're actually going to do this. So just this gentle redirecting and understanding will actually get your pussy on board so much quicker.
Okay. Oh, I love that. I'm gonna have to start
Yeah.
practicing that and using those tools because yeah, it's sometimes you get
Yeah.
lost and you're like, and then it's right away.
Totally.
It's like the whole okay, well, it's not self lubricating, but sure, put some lube, put some spit on it, and just stick it in,
Yeah.
and let's hope that then it responds. And now we're gonna go through the motions of having sex because this
Yes.
is what we agreed to do, even though I'm no longer into it like I was hoping
Into
I
it.
would be.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely,
Right.
absolutely,
Yeah.
and so it's again advocating like, "Hey, this could still feel good," and even though
Mm-hmm.
I was taught this message that I need to go along or that I'm supposed to acquiesce because we agreed, you can
Mm-hmm.
stop things, you can pause things, you can say no at any moment. We are just so used to women just feeling like it's easier, right? And it's just like, might as well not like rock
Mm-hmm.
the boat and just go along than being like, hey, I'm actually not quite feeling it. Can we go back to, like you said, the back massage, this or that? And then
Yeah.
letting your body get back on board and realizing your pleasure is equally as important as theirs.
Right. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. And I mean it is such a programmed fear, but it is like something we
Yeah.
really all do need to like work on. Okay. I totally want to switch gears here with like the dirty whatever.
Yes.
We let's get into the blowjob aspect of this because like I am
Yes.
dying to know. And don't get me wrong, I thoroughly enjoy giving a blowjob to a guy. I like watching their reaction, but I mean orgasmic for me, the giver. How can I do that? How can we all do that? I'm
Yes.
sure every woman out there is dying to know how we can make the blowjob more pleasurable for us.
For us, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
funny fact, I think I've actually had just as many orgasms giving a blowjob that I have had as like actually having sex or having somebody go down on
Oh
me. So,
my God. Okay.
yes. So, this is the thing. When we think about like going back to the brain and how we were socialized, how are you thinking about that blowjob? Because most of us are just like, oh, it's for him. I'm giving this
Mm-hmm.
for him. It's all of our energy and our focus and our thoughts are focused towards the giving and being the giver. And what I love to think about is like, regardless of the actions you're taking, you get to be in a place of receiving pleasure at any given moment. And so, like, maybe it does, like you said, you like seeing them getting really turned on. Well,
Mm-hmm.
letting that be part of your arousal, like, ooh, like they're getting really turned on, like because I'm so sexy, because I'm whatever, right? Like that kind of
Mm-hmm.
dirty talk to yourself, then like that switches the script right away. Now you're starting to receive more pleasure. Now you're seeing this as like this act of not just like they're getting some, but I am also
Mm-hmm.
receiving some because like I'm feeling so turned on because this whole situation is hot. So
Right.
those simple, like little switches, but a lot of us go into it with, even like I said before about the, shameful thoughts that were planted in our brain at the beginning, like it's just for them or it's derogatory or, they're whatever it might be, like this is a shameful act or this isn't about me, it's just about them. when we
Mhm.
recognize we're going into a blowjob with those thoughts, it makes sense we wouldn't feel good because
Right.
there's no opportunity for pleasure. There's no, juiciness for me. But when I'm allowing myself to fully step into feeling like a turned on woman, and then I am giving a blowjob, that is just reinforcing my self concept of being a turned on woman. And you can start to kind of play with that energy of like, ooh, where else am I feeling it in my body? Where else am I paying attention? And even though, there's the act of the blowjob, like you're going to have sensations because it's an explicitly erotic act, and your genitals will respond to explicitly erotic acts if you are approaching it in a way that's like yummy and juicy and delicious. And so then you'll start to feel some tingling down there, and you can start to feel turned on, and maybe you're touching yourself at the same time. So you're also giving yourself pleasure and receiving pleasure from the whole
Mm.
experience.
Okay, I like that. I do find it's weird, and I mean, obviously, everybody is different, but the whole 69 aspect of, like what guys like to do
Yeah.
and stuff like that, I have always found it to be distracting because I think like
Oh,
that.
I
It's like if
hate
I'm focusing
69.
on you,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to give you a good blowjob, and I'm trying to be into it, but now you're distracting me with what's going on back here. I'm no longer focused on what I'm doing up here. Like, it's almost like
Yeah.
that split in my brain takes away
Yeah.
from the act of like me trying to like give you the pleasure and me trying to be
Yes.
watching your response, but like then there's too much going on over here. Like, is that really a thing? Like, where our brains are just being split in two different directions, and like that's what's happening.
Yeah. For sure, but you know what's so interesting that you say that is like when I give a blowjob, I really love to touch myself at the same time. That doesn't feel
Okay.
distracting to me.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
if I try and do 69 for me, so everybody's different, right? All of our
Yeah.
wiring is different. I know a lot of women who love 69. For me, it is too distracting because I have less. I mean, you have a penis in your mouth, like, you can't, like, give any direction with it. You can't,
Mhm.
like, do exactly what you want. You can't touch it, like, it's a little bit harder, right? And
Yeah.
so I do feel a little bit more in control, like, if I'm touching myself while I am giving a blowjob, because that it feels less like my brain isn't torn because I know exactly how I want to be touched and can touch myself in that way,
Mhm.
right? And so I think that that comes in a huge part, and guys like 69, like I said, like I've never, I keep giving it a go. It's just not my thing, and I'm okay with that. Like, it's fine. It's just not my thing. And really enjoying the things like, a blowjob and touching myself that I like. But it's really about being curious and open, just like the stuff I was saying about getting your brain back into it. Like, ooh, what am
Mhm.
I noticing? Like, ooh, this feels so good. And even just the self talk that you might be giving yourself, like, I can feel you getting more aroused. Like, doesn't that feel
Right.
nice? Like, let's see how far we can take our arousal. So you're
Yeah.
really using these kind of like mental tricks to amplify your arousal and your experience of pleasure.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So it really is the internal dialogue of like while you're giving and what
Yeah.
you're doing, and redirecting almost that sexual energy kind of inwards to almost
Yes.
self-pleasure yourself while you're, giving them that blowjob. It like,
Yes.
I can visualize it, and it's like I can picture it, and, like, you can feel almost like it would be like a full body kind of tingling experience of, like,
Mhm.
the build up for yourself while you're giving them that pleasure
Yes.
and while you're down there, and, not thinking about it like it's a chore, but thinking about it like you're doing it for
Yes.
yourself to see your own
Yes.
reaction and things like that. Because I think that is the problem. A lot of women think of it as a chore, and they think of it as like something they
Yes.
have to do before getting to the part that they actually have to have sex. And, but
Yeah.
not
And how
thinking about
turned
it
on
of
do we
being
get by
done.
chores? Not, it's not a turn on, right?
Not at
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
Right, but
Okay.
when you start saying, like, "I love this. I love going down on my man. Like, this is so
Mhm.
fun. Like, let's see how turned on I can get. Like, ooh, he's really enjoying this. Like, I'm doing like, I'm so good at this. Like, I'm" all of these things that you're saying to yourself are generating that ability to, like, step into this self-concept that is really this wildly turned on woman who is open to receiving all of the
Right.
pleasure. Because when you feel erotically turned on, it's less about the act and more just how you're landing in your body. And when you're landing in your body that way, it's like you have so much power to amplify arousal and move orgasms and have full body orgasms and have all this kind of stuff because you're so in tune with yourself and you're really working with that energy.
Okay, I like that you said that. I want to kind of talk about that when you said that whole full body type of kind of like
Mhm.
orgasm, that internal kind of orgasm. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, most women struggle to have any type of orgasm, period, especially with a
Yes.
partner, but the clitoral, the G spot, and whatnot. So to have, say, like an internal full body orgasm,
Mhm.
like let's just the psychology behind that, or like the science in the brain around like that type of arousal, can we just kind of pick that apart and go
Yeah,
a little bit deeper with that?
absolutely. So the way that I like to think about it is like think about like a garden hose and a garden hose that the faucet is fully turned on and there's no leaks or kinks is going to have
Hmm.
the most water coming out, right? So think of that as like your orgasmic potential, a full turned on faucet and
Hmm.
no leaks or kinks or anything in the hose, okay? So what happens though is a lot of times we're not turning the faucet all the way on, so we're not really upping our arousal and we have so many small little leaks, and that's actually more the issue than having the water turned on. I find that most women, when they start to find out like where, and I'm just going to call it leakage because that's really how I feel
Hmm.
like it is. It's like leakage of focus, leakage of energy, right? Anytime we have these, think of that water as spraying out and it's going to be harder to orgasm. Or if you do, it's more like when you shake up a soda pop can and then you open it and it's like, and that's it,
Right.
right? Like it's very uneventful. And so understanding that like we can start to pay attention to where all these leaks are. And what we don't normally think about is so many of the leaks that you and I have been talking about. Like, what do I look like? What are they thinking? Am I taking too long? She's not responding.
Hmm.
Every single one of those is a big hole in your hose. And we don't have
Mm.
to fill up all of the holes. Fill up all the holes, no pun intended, on the hose to like get that full body one. But like just
Yeah.
think of like your pressure in general is going to
Hmm.
increase even if you just cover one of those holes up. So if you are feeling really uncomfortable in your body and you start healing like your body image and the way that you're loving on your body, like that's a big kink in your hose that's now not there.
Mm.
If you turn the lights off because the bright light is really distracting you, one more hole. If you're cold and you put on socks, one more hole. Sometimes if it's noisy, I can get really distracted. So I'll actually put earplugs in. It's just like one more thing to allow me to focus on my full body experience.
Ah, okay.
So there's so many
I
ways. So
love
it's
that
like,
analogy.
yeah. So it's just like the more like hole, I'm just going to keep going back to the more holes you plug up and fill, the better.
Sure, guys are
Yeah.
like, all they're thinking about is holes. How many
Uh,
holes can I fill?
yes.
What can
How
I
many
fill
holes
them
can we go?
with? Like, oh my
No, we heal
god.
our own holes and we close those ones up ourselves.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Right. But like, it's like the more we can kind of pull it all in and direct it towards our pleasure, the more orgasmic our experience is going to be. And so, really
Okay.
helping yourself bring a heightened awareness to like, where am I leaking? Like, what am I thinking about? What is getting in my way? Am I still like having residue of some shame from my youth? Am I
Mhm.
still having performative anxiety? Am I worried about his orgasm more than I'm worried about mine? Am I worried about his
Right.
experience more than I'm worried about mine? All these things are taking away from the pressure of that hose.
Okay. Yeah, it's so true
Yeah.
when you really think of it and you break it down like that, right? It makes so much more sense. And I really think that that goes back to the whole non-rushed sexual experience. And I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place for
Yes.
a quickie, but I
Yeah, they're
do
fun.
think
And
right? Yeah, absolutely. But
yeah.
people really should be slowing down an
Yes.
encounter, when you're being intimate, and taking the time to think about all those things, building it up in the right way so that it can be the most pleasurable experience that you're having, instead of like some 5-10 minute thing. Because I think like that sometimes that's the problem, is like I notice like, okay, somebody will start kissing you and you get excited and all of this
Yeah.
stuff builds, but then when it keeps building and you go straight to the act of it, I mean, you're kind of
Yeah.
then done in less than sometimes 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And yet,
Yeah.
the idea of what you thought you were creating from that intimate moment of the kiss and the sparks of everything, it's like you're wanting and hoping for this experience that you're going to be able to feel in your body, in your brain, and your clit everywhere. For I'd like to
Yeah.
think at least a solid 20 to 30 minutes of like pleasure and feels. But it's like all of a
Yes.
sudden we get this idea that it's quick, it's over and done, and oh, okay, well, I guess I should be happy with that. When
No,
really there's
please, please,
something,
for
it's
the
like,
love, none of you women be
yeah.
happy with that. Like, there's just, and it's just, it's poor sex education, and I'm not just talking
Mhm.
about like where's the clit, but it's like poor sex education about the stuff that I'm talking about here, like the
Yeah.
psychology of sex and how it's not existing in this bubble, and just understanding that like most women, like for us to get to a fully aroused state to like be able to even experience an orgasm is 20 minutes. It's on average 20 minutes. And how much of us are giving ourselves even 20
Mhm.
minutes to feel fully aroused, let alone like orgasm, so it's understanding just like the simple anatomy, it's
Right.
like we have erectile tissue too, just like men. And usually we wouldn't have sex with a penis that's flaccid, but we have sex
Right.
all the time before our erection, quote unquote, has happened, before
Mhm.
our tissues are fluffy and ready. Like we wouldn't expect a man to have an orgasm with a limp dick, but we're expecting ourselves to be able to have that when we aren't even turned on, like we aren't even
Right.
there yet. And that's not something that's wrong with us. Usually it's slowing down. And again, it's paying attention to like what leaks need to be plugged up.
Right. Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
true, right? And like, I mean, it's like on one side, I mean, there's so much beauty and, in being a woman and having all these other
Yeah.
things that we can experience and feel. But then on the
Yeah.
other side, sometimes it's like you feel like you're getting shorthanded when it comes to, your sexual experiences, because of the fact that we need more mental stimulation, we need more physical stimulation. And,
Yep.
having a partner who respects that and wants to slow down, instead of it just being like, well, I got hard and right away, what can I stick it in? Like,
Yeah.
where am I putting this? Because my orgasm is going to feel the same typically, whether it came in 5 minutes or it comes in the 20 minutes that I got to hold it off
Yeah.
to make sure you're, getting off and you're having a good time. And so it's just that thing. And so it's like sometimes I'm like, I feel wonderful that I get these different experiences. And then sometimes I'm like, well, but you're always getting that experience. And it's like, I really
Yeah.
have to work for it. And, sometimes, yeah, it
Yeah.
feels like we're shorthanded on that, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that because I talk with my husband now since, doing a lot of this work on myself, like
Mhm.
really understanding it more. And I'm like, wow, you really get the short end of the stick. Like you have no idea how
Oh,
good it can actually be. So I have a completely opposite thought because
okay.
I honestly feel like women's orgasms are so they're so much more powerful, they're so much more
Mhm.
intense, the way that it impacts our brain and our creativity and like all these kind of things. We just have to have more of those conversations that are tricky at the beginning, that
Mhm.
I'm not going to settle and that my pleasure matters and it's equally as important as you, and like really close the orgasm gap is like what we call it in the sex
Okay.
psychology world, like really closing
Yeah.
this orgasm gap and getting to this place. Like they might be able to get turned on really quick and they might be able to have a really quick one, but when we start to understand our body and really work with a lot of these mental tools and these mind body tools, our experience is so colorful and expansive, and there's so much more potential to grow, and that I think is just so fun.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk
Yeah.
about that for a second then here. Like what it is your actual the coaching side of what it is that you do
Yeah.
for, men and women that are listening that
Yeah.
want to dive into that, that want to heal that want to learn how to be able to come back to that. Like what does that coaching program or what does that work essentially look like
Yeah.
for, somebody to reach out to and to be able to work with you on those things?
Yeah, well, I have a podcast called It's My Pleasure, and it's called that
Mhm.
because it's all about your pleasure. And so really
Okay.
helping you, like, just having that awareness, I think that's a part of it, right? Understanding, like, some of the things I just brought up on that podcast, like, holy shit, I
Mhm.
never thought about that before. I never thought that I was focusing so much more on being desirable instead of tapping into
Mhm.
my own desire. Just like that unlock right there can change so much. So that's if, that's always there. In my coaching
Okay.
programs, I do a group coaching program. I also have one-on-one practice, but in my group coaching program, it's like every single week, I bring up a topic, we do a mind body exercise, and you're like, hey, like this happened or this went on. And I coach your brain through it. Like we see, okay, what's standing in the way? What are you believing? How can we look at this differently? And we really start to rewire your brain to be more pleasure positive for you and
Okay.
opening kind of that access to your body. I also have a course called Undressed, and that is just like a DIY thing. There's like 20 mind body practices that you can do, guided practices, and like a big workbook, but it's talking through a lot of the things that we are doing
Mhm.
here. So it's like starting to be, like your example of the bright light, right? Bringing that up, like, oh, I am noticing like some insecurity with my body. There's like a whole section just on how to do that, how to start thinking differently about your body, how to start creating a different relationship. And so there is a lot of just very tangible work we can do to rewire our brain and be more in our body.
Okay. I love that. Okay, so then
Yeah.
for everybody listening, where can they find you? Where's the best place to find like your podcast I'm assuming is on Spotify, Apple, um
Yep.
but then
It's
to be
on
able
all
to
the
reach out to
places.
you. Oh, perfect. What are
Yeah.
your platforms where people can find you?
So I'm at the practice of pleasure on Instagram. So you can always just DM me there,
Okay.
or talk to me there, or you can go to my website, which is www.daniellesavory.com.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Um Question then. So and I mean,
Yeah.
I would have loved to have kind of gotten into this episode, but I feel like this could potentially be maybe a conversation we can have later and like focus on it more.
Yeah.
Do you get into the psychology and kind of, the brain aspect of things to do with kinks and fetishes and those type of sexual taboo topics? Like,
Yeah, a little bit. Really what I'm focusing on is less about the actual act of the thing that you're doing and more
okay.
how are you thinking about it? And does that again create an erotic vessel? So does that whatever you're thinking about the thing have you leaning in? Or does it
Mhm.
have you leaning out? And so if it's creating you to lean out more, then we're just going to take a look at like what are some of those beliefs, right? So that is a lot of
Okay.
like understanding that it's not exactly about like what we're always doing, but what are we thinking about what we're doing? How are we going to treat ourselves after we've done the thing? That's a big thing with kink and fetishes. Like if you're
Okay.
going to feel shameful afterwards, if you're going to beat yourself up,
Right.
if you're going to say unkind things to yourself, you have no longer created a safe environment to explore that because now you have started hurting yourself, like literally
Mhm.
emotionally abusing yourself because of something you've done. So it's really like, how do I, again, have that fierce love, have my own back? And what do I
Mhm.
want to think about that? Like if I'm working with a woman, who grew up in the LDS community, because I've worked with a lot of those women, right? Like it's just like being naked and touching their body. Okay, well, how do you
Mhm.
want to feel about it? And let's say that I have given them homework for some self pleasure. Let's pick a strategy for exactly how you're going to talk to yourself, how you're going to treat yourself, and how you're going to feel afterwards. And it's a lot of the same work when it comes to kinks and fetishes, is really seeing like, how am I treating myself afterwards? Because that is the safety we really need to create. And what are some of the things I want to think and believe about it?
Okay. I like that because I feel
Yeah.
like there is so much judgment around obviously different kinks and fetishes and people who they want to try
Yeah.
things or maybe they've done it. And then unfortunately, there is that shame aspect of it that comes afterwards. So then right
Yeah.
away we think, well, this isn't for us and I can't ever do that again. But it's not that you didn't enjoy it in the moment, but you're right. It's the
Yeah.
afterthoughts that really
Yes.
ruin the experience that you were trying to get out of it or that you did have that you feel like you can't have again.
Yes, exactly, right? It's like I call it
Okay.
don't poo poo on your pleasure, right? So it's like, well, we had a great experience and then we look back on it and we have all these like
Mhm.
new thoughts and it's like taints the memory. It taints the experience where it's like instead let's understand we did enjoy it and we can always ask ourselves the question like do I want more of this?
Mhm.
Why do I want more? Or why do I not? And look at our reasons. Like, are your reasons
Right.
because you're afraid? Are your reasons because you feel shameful? Or are your reasons because, you know what, I tried it, it was okay, but it's not really my thing? Because if we're just choosing reasons because we don't want to feel shameful, then let's instead approach the shame instead of just trying to avoid the discomfort that comes with the shame afterwards.
Okay. I like
Yeah.
that. It really is just goes to show how powerful our minds are to either convince
Yes.
us of something, to convince us not of something, to ruin an experience, to love an experience, to like it's crazy how much it really does
Yeah.
come back to our brain and yet you wouldn't really think of that when you just think about sex itself, right?
No, no, we never think about the brain, but it's the most hands down powerful sex organ there
Yeah.
is. And when we learn to work with it instead of against it, it's like your orgasmic capacity just goes through the roof.
Mhm. And I think it's obviously something that we all could be working on, and we could all take more time
Yeah.
to kind of have an understanding about of how it is either working for us or against us, and then trying to, heal those things and work on those things for, like you said, more pleasure in our lives, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We're worthy of it.
Absolutely. I love that. Awesome. Danielle, thank you so much for coming on and sharing so much. I feel like this was such an educational episode and so many things that we just don't even think about when we think about sex, things that I didn't even think about. And I experienced some of those things. And like the way
Yeah.
that you kind of analyzed it and kind of like showed a different side of it of like thinking about it, it kind of almost makes like you were saying, asking for our pleasure and thinking about our pleasure still at the forefront of like what our sexual experience should be for women and honoring that and being okay with that, right?
Yes. Yes. Well, thanks for having me. It's been so fun. You ask great questions.
Thank you. I mean, I have a million more. I could probably keep going down this road, but for
Yeah.
everybody
We might have
listening,
to do a few more episodes. You can invite me back
yeah,
anytime.
absolutely.
Make a
And I
list.
just
We'll
the
schedule it again.
psychology around sex is just so fascinating. That yeah,
Yes, I love
I
it.
love
This
it.
is why I do this
Mhm.
for a living. Yeah,
And who doesn't want to talk about sex all the time, right?
yeah,
Like, what
yeah,
a better way to spend your day. And yeah, so I love it.
yeah. I
But
get to
yeah,
talk about
thanks.
sex in the brain because I nerd out on that, so it's like my two fetishes, the brain and sex. It's great.
Yeah, you fill your cup in both ways. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
I was
Well,
going to
I
call it
love
a
it.
hole,
Thanks
but
again
I'll
for
give
having
everybody a
me.
break. Yeah, absolutely. So,
Love it.
thank you. All right, guys, stay tuned. And yeah, definitely reach out to Danielle, learn more, figure it out, check out the course, and seek her out on all social platforms. Follow along and listen to her podcast. I think we could all learn, and I'm excited to learn and to listen as well. So, thank you.